when you don't have your health is when you realize how important it is. So the first question you asked me, the reason why I think so many people are really kind of disconnected from that feeling is because they don't understand the true value of health until it's been fully taken away from them. So I decided to go down a self-healing rabbit hole because I had really nothing to lose.
Welcome to the Hunger for Change podcast. I'm Niklas Gustafson, and over the last decade, I've been my own guinea pig, reviving ancestral living, holistic health, and nutrition. Today, I'm joined by Tristan Scott. He's an electrical engineer, health coach, and one of the few people who really understands how man-made EMFs are affecting our biology. In this episode, we go deep into what most people get wrong about electromagnetic fields, why public health agencies and tech companies have ignored the risks, and what you can actually do to protect yourself. Tristan's company, Daylight Computer, has built the first screen designed around human health, not just convenience. So if you use tech every day, which we all do by now, you need to hear this conversation. Tristan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's great to be here.
We'll start with a core question that I always ask. What does health mean to you?
What does health mean to me? That's a great question. And sometimes I would say the most simple questions are the most challenging to answer. But for me, health is having no limitations and really living the fullest capability of what your human body, soul, mind, spirit, physical can achieve on a daily basis. So I think in the greater context of a modern world, unfortunately, that has been distorted a bit. And I think we don't really, we often take for granted, and most people now don't really understand what health actually is. And to me, it's just trying to unlock the fullest sense of vitality in an everyday living.
I agree. So, Tristan, you're an electrical engineer, right? And how did you become interested in natural health and in artificial lighting?
Yeah, so I always have been a fan of the outdoors. My mom is actually from Austria, so I grew up hiking, skiing, camping, all these things. Of course, strayed away from that when I was a teenager and in university. And yeah, I had one too many concussions was actually the inflection point of my health journey. So I played soccer in university and had one too many concussions from sport mostly, and really didn't heal properly, kind of didn't get any help from the centralized like neurologist and medical system here in the US. So I was 22 years old and couldn't exercise, was sleeping 12 hours a night, was super irritable, sensitive to noise, light, sound, and wasn't really happy that was my present moment. It was pretty depressing. So I decided to go down a self-healing rabbit hole because I had really nothing to lose. So I began consuming books and podcasts, and very quickly I started realizing there was all this information available online about improving your health, about healing your brain, about having deliberate lifestyle changes implemented that could have a profound impact on your health and well-being. And that really the information we were being taught, provided, having guidance on at the high level of, government and just these large bodies and big companies, was really kind of not what we should be following to achieve optimal health. And I started implementing these things in my life. I started being very deliberate about sleep hygiene, about stress. So, I bought a pair of blue light blockers, even though they're kind of the very crappy, mostly clear ones, in 2018. I started watching the sunrise every morning. I started grounding. I started turning my phone on airplane mode. I was very surface level at this stage, but I started being very intentional about my lifestyle when I was 22. And I got better. My headaches went away. The sensitivity to stimulants in my environment started to slowly be manageable, and kind of got back into a normal routine. So from there, I was pretty hooked. I was very much like you get into the world as a young man, one of the most important things for anyone to be knowledgeable about is their health, because when you don't have your health is when you realize how important it is. So the first question you asked me, the reason why I think so many people are really kind of disconnected from that feeling is because they don't understand the true value of health until it's been fully taken away from them. And that's what happened to me. And I was very fortunate to have turned it around, in a span of 12 to 15 months to a reasonable point. But I still went on like a multi-year healing journey in terms of continuing to progress. And I still do to this day, like 6, 7 years later. But I just really got obsessed with it. And I started first focusing on like the food and the diet side of things. I got really into regenerative agriculture and went keto and animal based, sourcing everything like hyper local, became friends with my ranchers and buying half beefs and going to farmers market. I love that. I think that's always a lot where people start, these very tangible things, and you feel almost an immediate impact. But I was doing these other things around light and EMFs and grounding simultaneously. I just really hadn't taken a deep dive. And eventually in 2022, roughly 2023, early on, when I was kind of saturated or satisfied with my knowledge about food and the food system, I wanted to keep learning. And I realized getting on social media that the electromagnetic environment and inputs to our biology were tremendously important. And again, I'd been grounding, doing the circadian stuff for a couple years now. But then I got on there on social media and I realized not a lot of people know deeply about these topics, and especially regarding EMFs. This is very complex, and not many health influencers, not many doctors, practitioners have this baseline knowledge of physics to be able to convey the message, understand the nuance, and actually think about what are the best solutions. And I quickly kind of went down that rabbit hole and really just became excited to become one of the most knowledgeable people based on my passion, experience, like background, and then also because it was fundamentally aligned with the lifestyle habits I was implementing, to where each passing year that went by, the more time I spent outside in what I like to call the real world, connected to nature, connected to the local environment, getting the right light, getting the right electromagnetic inputs, the better I felt. And I wanted to, dive down the rabbit hole as to why. And that's kind of what I've been doing now for a few years. And it's really fun to connect the dots, but it can be very complex, but boiled down to something very simple. And that's what I said, the natural world, nature, the input signals that have existed in our environment for hundreds of thousands of years as humans, millions of years for all life on this planet. That's really all we need. And it provides us all the information, all the guidance, all the energy, all the healing modalities to thrive and to have true health.
Hmm. I couldn't agree more. I love being out in the nature, close to nature, or even at the beach. Um, and let's talk about EMFs in a while. But before that, I'd just like to know, how important do you think sunlight is? How crucial is sunlight to our health? Because as you, I know that you love the sun. I love the sun myself, and I actually moved from Sweden to Spain 25 years ago. I was your age. I was about 28, 29 when I moved to Spain, and I believe that one of the main reasons was the sunlight. The sunlight, being able to be outdoors, basically all year round. Which actually in Sweden you're indoors a lot of the time of the year. You're indoors. So I just wanted to know, how important do you think that sunlight is?
Yeah, I think sunlight is one of the most, debatably, the most important aspect of our health. I think that is the predominant source of energy of all life on this planet. We are life on this planet, so we should value that at the highest level. It is different energy that we are consuming. It's photonic in nature. It's different from the food we eat, but it is still so important to our biology, and it's something that we've probably been even more disconnected from versus our food environment. You could argue that, but to me, that's nuance and doesn't matter. Is that sunlight is driving biological functions at the lowest level. And you can start with the circadian component, to where if you have a system, any system, whether it's your car, whether it's a vacuum cleaner, whether it's a factory assembly line, the most important thing in a system for many different functions to be executed in sequence, which is, our biology, our bodies are trillions and trillions of reactions and communication signals are going on in seconds. Timing is the most important thing, because if you don't have synchronicity in that system with so many different actions, reactions, signaling, changes going on, you're not going to be really functioning at the most optimal level, and you'll probably have some chaos, you'll have some errors, you'll have some mishaps. And that's why, to me, the circadian component is probably the most important aspect, because everything is downstream from timing. And what sets your circadian rhythm at the highest degree is light. And that's where, you can go down that rabbit hole of blue light actually is even the most dominant time giver or Zeitgeber of your circadian system as well. So that's why, like, during the day, like, I'm getting so much blue light here, but it's from the sun. And the sun is a full spectrum nutrient. It is the entire visible spectrum of light. It is predominantly infrared light, which is far more restorative, lower energy, longer wavelength. And then it's also ultraviolet, which is high energy, very stimulating, very, potent for our biology, and can be overdone, but it's also extremely important for proper biological function for many different reasons. And that's it. It's a multivitamin. It's a photonic multivitamin that we are now, because of our indoor lifestyles, completely removing ourselves from, and we're getting like tiny little slivers of this sunlight spectrum, which is distorted, and we're thus seeing a repercussion of that. And the circadian inputs, the timing of our biological systems, have never been more dysfunctional. So to me, that's driving so many downstream issues. And then you layer in all the other environmental factors on top of that, and of course, it makes things worse, and you see the chronic disease epidemic that we have. But for me, compared to 100 years ago, removing ourselves from being outdoors as much as we were is probably, and adulterating our light environment and being removed from sunlight and demonizing sunlight is it's probably the biggest shift in terms of an input signal that is having the largest impact on our health
Right.
from the entire level, because
Hmm.
everything is kind of cascading from there.
Yeah. When you mentioned the spectrum and different colors, the different wavelengths you get from the sunlight, it makes me think of about food. It's basically the same, because when you get refined sugar, you get refined seed oils, etc. You don't get the whole foods. Whole foods is actually what we need, right? We need all the nutrients. It's the same with sunlight, right? If you get refined carbs, you only get like the blue light, for example,
Yep.
right? It's similar.
It's a very, very great analogy. It's malnutrition, and then there's malillumination, as John Ott liked to say, who's one of the pioneers of health and light. And yeah, we need to think of it as a whole food, a nutrient dense input signal. And just like a steak, or, a produce that has grown like in your local environment, that has so many different compounds, like food has hundreds, thousands of different compounds. That's full spectrum food. Full spectrum sunlight has an almost thousands and thousands of different wavelengths, depending on how much you split up the spectrum, and they all impact our biology differently. They
Right.
all have its own purpose. Some don't go very deep, but they're high energy. Some have this circadian component. Some are more restorative and scatter deep into our tissues and cells, and they all are synergistic. So when we see research saying UV is causing skin cancer, UV is bad for our health, but they're studying it in isolation in a lab under blue light, this is not indicative of how you're consuming this full spectrum nutrient in nature. And everything in nature has been very, very well thought through. You know, life on this planet has survived millions and millions of years. So there's no, the design of experiments of the natural world is been pretty vetted out. And of course, yes, you can overdo anything. If you ate nutrient dense steak and potatoes and produce, like if you just kept eating and eating and eating, that would probably not be good. So the sun can be the
Right.
same. Like there is a threshold to where too much is too much, but the form it's being consumed in is exactly what we need. However, there is certainly context, and I think that is where biology, genetics, skin type is actually important. So you've kind of made it easy for yourself by moving to Spain, and I think that's brilliant. And it is certainly easier to be healthy when you're on the beach or in a high sunlight environment and it's warm because you can just be outside more often.
Yeah.
It's easier.
The closest to the equator, right?
Yeah. However, if you're of Scandinavian and Swedish descent and I'm like of Central European descent and I live in Wyoming, it gets really cold here. There is also biological mechanisms and resilience for us to not only survive but thrive in the winter time if we embrace that local environment. But
Yeah.
because we've been so removed from the natural world and we spend so much time indoors, we're not able to deal with kind of that harder season. And we live in this endless summer metabolism, and there's no more cyclicality. Nature, sunlight, it's all about cyclicality and all about timing of systems in
Yeah.
rhythm with that cyclicality.
Hmm. And one of the things that without being outdoors, without getting the sunlight, our melatonin production doesn't really work the way it should be, right? And one of the things that surprised me recently was that I understood that before I thought that the melatonin production was in our pineal gland. But now I realize that we actually get a lot of the melatonin from our cells, from the mitochondria. Could you explain that as an expert? How does that work?
Yeah, that was almost the transformative point for me was realizing that melatonin is being produced in the subcellular level in the mitochondria when your body is exposed to near infrared light specifically. And that was a light bulb moment for me because everyone knows how important sleep is for your health. A lot of people know how important melatonin is. It's the master antioxidant, I like to call, that your body is endogenously producing. It is far more potent than other antioxidants. It has this cascading effect to quench free radicals where you can oxidize melatonin and then that byproduct will still be able to quench a free radical and do that like 5 to 10 times over. It's incredible. It upregulates glutathione, another endogenously produced antioxidant. So the whole premise of, oxidative stress and antioxidants combating aging, we want to focus on the antioxidants that we're naturally producing in our bodies. That is the key takeaway. It's anti-cancer as a result of that. You can go on. There's so much research. It's actually really undeniable at this point. Even mainstream medicine would agree, I would say. So most people understand the melatonin is this hormone of darkness, and it's only being secreted from the pineal gland when we are reducing the light exposure in our environment. We're getting ready for bedtime, which is ultimately true, but that is only 5% or maybe even slightly less of the melatonin that we're producing. Most of it is being produced in the mitochondria kind of continuously throughout the day especially specifically when we're exposed to near infrared light. And the takeaway there is this is the natural buffer. This is the natural restoration at the cellular level to offset the very high energy wavelengths that we're exposed to in sunlight. It's also being produced when we're exercising, when we're doing kind of these hormetic stressors or these activities that are good for us, but they're also taxing, and then we build back stronger, the whole hormesis argument. So melatonin is really buffering the response, and it's providing that cellular cleanup because all of these activities, blue light exposure, ultraviolet exposure, exercise, these are inducing an oxidative response. Free radicals are being produced at the cellular level, which are great. That is how our body communicates, is with reactive oxygen species. What we don't always want to do is take a bunch of antioxidants unnaturally, supplementally, and then blunt this response. Whereas melatonin and exposure to near infrared and sunlight is the natural balancing mechanism there. And near infrared light, because we've moved inside, we have glass that predominantly filters out near infrared light. We've switched our lighting indoors from incandescents, which are very rich in infrared light, to LEDs, which are completely absent. We are now extremely, extremely deficient in near infrared light. Thus, we're deficient in the synthesis of melatonin at the subcellular level. So the reactive oxygen species production, the oxidative stress has now really gotten out of control. And then you see cellular damage, you see kind of chronic disease, mitochondrial dysfunction, all proliferating at younger and younger ages and earlier on, and just higher prevalence in general. And it's because a large reason of that could be because our natural cleanup and cellular repair has been severed because we're no longer exposed to near infrared light in the form of sunlight.
Basically, we don't get the near infrared red light that we used to,
That's correct. Yes.
right? Yeah. So, so what are your thoughts on sunscreens? Do they actually do more harm than good?
Yes, definitely. Well, most of them are toxic, oxybenzone and these other like very harsh chemicals. So I would say those are certainly not great for many reasons, biochemical reasons, and then also you're blocking ultraviolet light, which is is very intense for our biology, but very important. So when you're blocking any light, you're distorting the spectrum and you're not getting that nutrient. You're not producing vitamin D, which is tremendously important. You're not having this cascade of effects from your hormonal production. That's all downstream from ultraviolet light as well. And then what you're doing is you're actually blocking ultraviolet light and you're letting through a ton of blue light still and violet light, which are also very high energy visible. So you're kind of getting some of the harmful wavelengths, none of the really high energy, highly stimulating wavelengths, which are very important for hormonal function, very important for energy. So to me, if you are going to be outside for a short amount of time, if you're going to be outside for a reasonable amount of time, it's all an individual's kind of threshold, I would say, because I would agree that getting like sunburnt, like to the crisp, like you're a lobster, is probably not great. But why would you get so red? Why would you have such a high response negatively to UV exposure? Is probably because you don't spend enough time outside in general and you haven't built this solar callus. B, you haven't gone outside in the morning and watched a sunrise, which again, the infrared light is preparing your body. It's preconditioning you for higher energy wavelength exposure. And then C, you can just put on clothing or you can put on a hat or a shirt and still get the infrared and the other spectrum of light that's really important for our biology come through, because infrared penetrates through clothing, but ultraviolet does not. So to me, if you're getting if you're putting on sunscreen, you're really just unaware of your light environment. And I would say if you're on a mountain or on a boat for like 14 hours in a day, it's a different story and maybe it makes sense. But we really have been, I think, conditioned as a society that ultraviolet light is really dangerous. And I think that couldn't be further from the truth. And a lot of the studies, actually, a few of them come out of Sweden, looking at like population wide. People who spend more time outside have lower
Yeah,
incidences of melanoma, and the people who spend
exactly.
the most amount of time have the lowest all-cause mortality risk. So, of course, if you isolate something in a lab and it is very high energy, it can cause cellular damage. That is going to be the result that you find. But if you have the full spectrum light and you have the solar callus and the lifestyle and you're out in the morning, and then, of course, if it's high noon and you've spent already 6 hours outside, you can go in the shade or put on a hat or a piece of clothing. That's really where we need to get back to common sense of all animals on this planet evolved outside. Why would we
Right.
want to block ourselves from the provider of life on this planet and also
Totally.
the main full spectrum nutrient from an
Yeah.
electromagnetic perspective?
So sunscreens and basically sunglasses, the same thing, right? You're blocking
Yes.
part of the natural spectrum,
You're
right?
completely blocking. So your main photoreceptors are in your eyes, of course, and that is guiding all downstream execution of biological functions, timing, circadian rhythms, and all of a sudden you're putting on glasses that are blocking the ultraviolet spectrum, which is very important, for biology, ultraviolet A specifically, and then it's all of a sudden it's dark, right? So it's high noon, you're outside, but it's dim. You're confusing your biology. And there's now plenty of studies population wide that are simply saying the brighter your days are and the darker your nights are, the longer you're going to live. And that's makes total sense because that's what's going on naturally. And people are wearing sunglasses when it's cloudy out. They're wearing them
Yeah.
indoors. They're wearing them
It's
like
crazy.
all the time. So they're living in perpetual dullness. Their
Yeah.
body's really confused about what time it is, what season it is, because you're cutting yourself off from the main input signal that is giving your body the information it needs to know where it is, what time it is, what season it is, and thus, how should I be optimizing my metabolism, my hormone production to thrive in this setting? And
Right.
that's yeah, um
I mean, I think it's a fashion. So a lot of people start wearing sunglasses because of the fashion, but then they get too sensitive. Their eyes get too sensitive, and then they get used to it, and they can't be without their sunglasses. It's
yes.
crazy.
And I have
S-
blue eyes, I think you have blue eyes, like, we
Yeah. Yeah.
you don't need it, and if, again, you're on water or you're on snow on top of a mountain, maybe it's a different story, but for everyday life,
Mm.
there's absolutely no need.
Last weekend I was up in the mountains here in Switzerland, in at 3,000 meters, and I didn't use sunglasses. No sunscreen, no sunglasses. Actually, the thing is that once you get used to a lot of sun, you have no problems being out
Yeah.
in the sun, even though there is snow, around you. But you need to get used to it. That's for sure. You just mentioned it. If you're indoors and suddenly you in the at winter time you fly from Sweden, which is dark, you go to the Canary Islands in Spain, and suddenly you expose yourself to a lot of sun. Of course, you get sunburned if you stay in the sun for 6 hours. So you need to build up that solar calories, right?
Exactly, yeah.
I installed infrared panels in my sauna. But since I'm out in the sun a lot, I don't really feel the difference. I suppose I get all that infrared light anyway, so I don't really need it. But what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think that's probably factual is what you're saying, because you're getting the predominant wavelengths in sunlight. So if you're outside, you're getting all the infrared, the red you need really. the difference between sun and these photobiomodulation panels is the panels have like three wavelengths. They have like, you know, 650, 780, 850, 1050 maybe. They have like 2 to 4 wavelengths, which is great. That's where a lot of research is. If you like break your ankle or you have a wound and you want to like really max healing, that could be great. I think it's like a short-term medicinal intervention, I would say. But if you think that's going to replace sunlight, which has every wavelength from in the red range and 600 nanometers to infrared starts at 780 and goes tens and hundreds of microns. So we're talking like almost an infinite number of wavelengths, especially in the infrared range, which is by far the most vast and the predominant factor of sunlight. So you don't really you can't really think about it as a replacement. You could think about it as like a supplemental intervention. And
Right.
again, I think they're great for very specific items, but in general, most of them, they all have the same design. They're all like just made in China with cheap LEDs and they have like 2, 3 wavelengths. And in the winter, maybe that's really helpful for you if you can never get outside. But again, in the winter, even if you're wearing 4 layers of clothing and it's cloudy, you're getting more infrared, you're getting a broad spectrum of sunlight. So that's still better,
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
say. And
Is it possible to get an infrared overdose?
an infrared
Okay.
overdose.
Yeah. Could you get too much of infrared light?
I'm sure you could get too much of anything for sure. Yeah. If you're again consuming it at the wrong times or it's been completely isolated as well, I would say that could be an issue. But I think we're so deficient in infrared light and we're so overexposed to visible, high energy visible like blues that I doubt that would really be a problem
Right.
because infrared is super restorative and has that again natural balancing mechanism of melatonin, so your body's kind of providing the cleanup after the fact.
Right. Yeah. So what would you say is the biggest misconception when it from mainstream experts when it comes to circadian rhythm and artificial light?
Yeah, and just to preface, I guess from the photobiomodulation perspective, these really high power density, if you're doing 6 inches away from your panel, like yes, you can
Yeah.
definitely overdose on that because that's like
Okay.
that is different than sunlight,
Yeah.
and or an incandescent bulb. So just to clear up there, I think the biggest misconception around light is that it doesn't matter that much. I think the biggest misconception is that we haven't really placed a strong enough value about how important our light environment really is, and that even a simple thing like switching out your light bulbs or getting outside 10% more or watching the sunrise every morning can have a profound impact on your health. And I don't think that we have studied this really enough, and it's challenging because it's nature and studying anything in a more natural environment with all these independent variables is a challenge. But I think the biggest misconception is that we agree that sleep is really important, but we don't understand what's really driving the cellular restoration and repair that makes sleep so important.
Mm. Tristan, could you share some easy lighting changes that our listeners can make right now to better their health at home or at work?
Yeah. Step number one is always the more time you can spend outside, the better off you're going to be. So if you can work outside, fantastic. If you work in an office, but you can walk to work instead of drive, or you can take your lunch break, or you can take your one-on-one meeting with your boss on a walk outside, or you can quit your gym membership and find a park and work out outside. You can spend your weekends camping or immersed in nature because you work in an office during the week. That to me is really the biggest levers you can pull is the more time you spend outside, the better you're going to feel. setting your circadian rhythm, your light environment, your timing mechanisms up starts right when you wake up. So if you're able to get outside at first light and at sunrise, that is going to be profound in setting up your day for success, because you're getting all the right input signals, all the right timing being set for your day when you get bright light exposure in the morning. And even if it's cloudy, even if it's overcast, even if it's raining, that matters, and that has a big impact, and you're getting a lot of infrared exposure. And then if you have to be indoors, trying to configure a lighting environment that is more synergistic or more balanced with what would be going on outside. So brighter during the day, bright as possible during the day, and dark and dim as possible after the sun goes down. Now that's going to change depending on the time of year, where you live, etc. And the majority of our indoor lighting is, of course, very deficient in blue, or very deficient in infrared, and very heavy in blue light, and windows are filtering out UVA light and UV light, I should say, and infrared. So what I like to do is, if I'm working indoors, I like to get as much natural lighting as possible. My windows are pretty old, so they actually let through a good amount of light. And then I have bright incandescents around me. And I've also recently gotten a UVA/violet LED bulb to try and add some of that back in. And I've been reading more about how violet light can prevent myopia progression, which is very interesting. So you're just trying to copy what's going on outside. And then um, I you try and get as full spectrum of a lighting exposure. So if you can't do anything about the blue light in your office, you shouldn't wear blue light blockers, in my opinion, during the day, because blue light is nature's stimulant. It's what's
You need that.
providing
You need
wakefulness.
that in the
Yes.
mornings, right?
You
Yeah.
need that in the morning. You need that all day to
Yeah.
set that timing, and you have enough dopamine and stimulation and cortisol to drive, function. So why would you want to block that off? Instead of blocking it, what you can do is add back in what's being taken out by being indoors, and thus, you're providing actually higher amount of light energy overall. So that's where the incandescents, the halogen bulbs are very nice. I know Europe, they're probably a lot harder to find, but you can probably find some sort of chicken bulb or heat lamp that's mostly incandescent or infrared at a farm store. That's what I do. They cost like $10. And ultraviolet, like 360, 380 to 400 nanometers, adding that back in, especially during the daytime, is
Yeah.
probably something that you can do pretty easily. And then at night, dim as possible. Think about what light we had for all of human evolution. Mostly is fire, candles. And if you look at the spectrum of light of a fire, it's almost identical to an incandescent, which is basically a tungsten filament on fire. So I like to use beeswax candles and low power incandescents at night. I think they're better than red LEDs, because I think most people aren't going to just put red LEDs in their whole house. And in reality, it's actually more similar to like a campfire. So red LEDs are very isolated light, and they flicker, and
Yeah.
they wouldn't exist really in
Exactly.
nature.
They flicker. So that's the
That's the other
you can
thing. Yeah.
that's the other thing, exactly. So let's say we've been under artificial light for many years, which most of us actually have in our modern society. Is it possible to repair um, our circadian rhythm, and how long would that take?
Probably 2 to 3 days. Not
Only,
not long at all. Yeah,
not long.
maybe a week. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's there's been a study from Colorado University, Boulder, that showed pretty much a complete restoration of circadian rhythms from going camping for a weekend. So that's the good thing. Our bodies, our mitochondria, which are really our electromagnetic sensors, they're highly adaptable. They can, it's unbelievable that I could fly to Switzerland, or I could fly to Australia in a matter of days, depending, how drastic it is. my jet lag will be switched. Like I'll be able to acclimate pretty quickly. So you can think of it, if you've ever traveled internationally, however long it takes you to kind of get into that time zone, that's your circadian rhythm shifting. Now, Matthew Walker and people have written about, it takes, for every 1 hour you change, it takes a day to shift. Now, that sounds really nice on paper. I don't think that's entirely true. I think there's two levels of it, really. And I think when you move environments completely, there is like a timing shift that happens at a kind of surface level. Like I've gone to Australia a few times the past couple of years, and I can hack my travel to where I'm fasting and I'm changing my light environment, and then I'm spending as much time outside when I get there. I can shift to where I'm sleeping and waking up at the right times in about 2 to 3 days, 2 days, which is pretty quick. However, the entire time I am there, I don't feel 100%. And I was there for like 5 weeks one time. And that's because there is way deeper biological adaptations going on to all of the light inputs, all of the electromagnetic inputs, and that takes a lot longer. But if you're in your local environment and you're just like, unfortunately, don't have the best lighting environment and haven't for a while, but you start spending more time in nature and you start waking up at sunrise, you can shift your circadian rhythm and your light environment very, very quickly. Like we're very adaptable. And then you're giving your body now this opportunity to repair and restore at nighttime when you've been combating all this cellular onslaught during the day. And that is something that is definitely true, and you can reverse, you can at least improve mitochondrial function drastically by being very deliberate in your lifestyle. You may not be
Yeah.
able to reverse everything, of course. We're
Mm.
aging, we're accumulating mutations and toxins and damage, but you can make a pretty substantial difference in a short period of time.
Great. I think that's good news for a lot of people.
We're a
S-
very a resilient species, with all this stuff in our environment
yeah.
and the crazy things we do. You'd think like we'd be so stressed out that we'd just die. But
Yeah.
in fact, we're pretty darn stubborn and resilient, which is good.
Right. So let's leave sunlight for a while and let's go into EMF exposure. And I'd like to know if you could give us just one recommendation on how to reduce EMF. What would that be?
The number one recommendation is put distance between you and your technology. That would be the number one recommendation. High level, if you're not convinced this is harmful, there's thousands of studies. I could tell you that this is completely alien, has never existed on our planet. It's highly modulated, it's highly pulsed. So nothing in nature exists like this at all. It's completely engineered waves. And it's very useful for technology, and we're using it right now. But have my laptop 2 feet away from me. I never hold my cell phone next to my brain when I'm making a phone call. I don't sleep with any electronics, any powered devices or plugged in appliances in my bedroom. I actually don't even have power on in my bedroom. It's because distance is your best friend for EMFs due to what's called inverse square law. The doubling of distance from you and the source quadruples the reduction of the field. If you 3x, it's a 9x. So it's squaring the distance away from the source. So people often are worried about their cell towers. Oh, I have a cell tower 400, 500 meters from my house that's giving me cancer. No, it's not, probably. Or it might be adding to that. But what's more important is how you use your cell phone, because
Yeah.
our cell
So
phone,
how far away should the cell phone be from us? I mean,
the, the
when we're
tower,
sleeping.
I your
No,
cell
no. I
phone.
mean our cell phones. How
Oh,
far
yeah.
away? What's the recommended distance?
The recommended is the more distance, the better. So what I'm saying here is when you have to use your cell phone and you have to have it on, there's two things you can have it on as well. You can have it connected to Wi-Fi and you can have it connected to cellular data, right? Those are two different modalities.
Oh.
And within them, there's actually multiple different frequency bands. Wi-Fi in the US is using 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz. Cell phones on cellular data could be communicating to 5, 6, 7, maybe even 10 different bands of frequency throughout the day. So you got to think that every time there's a signal being outputted, especially when you have a Wi-Fi chip and a cellular data chip, they're doing they're having two different output radio frequency signals to execute really the same function. So if you're not going to hardwire your internet like I do, most people don't. It's more challenging. That would be ideal for a home work setup. But if your cell phone's just on at home and you have Wi-Fi, turn cellular data off
Turn
because
off
you can
5G.
you can do everything on Wi-Fi that you can do on cellular data now. You can even text
Yeah.
and call, right? So the
And
Wi
once you leave your home, that's when you turn off the 3G, 4G, 5G, right?
Yeah, so if you're traveling and you need to carry your phone on your person or, on your body, I would turn it on airplane mode. If you don't need to be reachable in the moment, which I think we're all very too reachable, you should always have your phone on airplane mode if it's very close to your body. And then
Yep.
ideally, you connect to a Wi-Fi network, you flick on just Wi-Fi, and if you need to turn on cellular data, you do that because there's no Wi-Fi. You make your call or send your text, and then you put it back on airplane mode. But really, the distance between you and the device is tremendously important. And the cell phone is above and beyond the largest exposure source we have because it's always so close to us and we use it so much. And it has so many different sources. It has cellular data, it has Wi-Fi, it has Bluetooth, and we're using it an ever increasing amount. So headphones, I mean, I use a little selfie stick and a speakerphone sometimes, like whatever you need to do. And then can you shift more of your work to your laptop or to a device that has a bit more separation and is designed not to be as addicting, which is, a whole nother conversation. But that and the sleep environment, your sleep, we've already talked about how important it is. So if you get all the electronics and the power devices out of your sleep environment, if you don't need your Wi-Fi on at night, you can turn it off. You're just reducing your exposure threshold. And we don't know. It really depends on your cellular tolerance. It depends on your health status. We don't know exactly where that threshold is, but this is all just a layer and layer of a toxic stressor that we're being exposed to. So the more you can remove the exposure and reduce it, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah. So when you're on the phone, it's much better to have the not to have it close to your head, right?
Yes.
Put on the speakerphone, or even AirPods, right? AirPods are even better than having your phone close to your ear.
Yes.
Which actually
for sure.
brings me to my next question, because my son, he's 9 years old, 19 years old. He's studying computer engineering, and he knows pretty much about this electronics in general. And so I've been discussing this with Vigo, and he tells me that you don't have to worry about the AirPods, because AirPods, that's a non-ionizing radiation. So Dad, don't worry about that. But I'm not so sure, so I'd love to hear your opinion on this.
I mean, everything we just mentioned is non-ionizing radiation. Everything actually in the entire podcast except UV light is non-ionizing radiation. Red light, infrared light, blue light. But those all have impactful effects on our biology for a different modality, mostly through like at least visible light is very much electron excitation interactions. But then infrared has a different modality and it's non-ionizing. Radio frequencies, there's thousands of studies that are showing harmful biological effects. There's warning labels on technology. There is so much out there that is agreeing that even low energy wavelengths, like from electrical power, 50 hertz, 60 hertz, have biological effects. And this is all non-ionizing. So this theory that non-ionizing, and I'm an electrical engineer, they say the same thing. Most engineers, most physicists will just say non-ionizing radiation has no biological effect unless it's at a certain power density threshold to where there's a thermal effect. And this has been the statement for 70 years now, maybe more, even though in those 70 years, there's been thousands and thousands of studies, many of them funded by the military, by the government agencies in the 60s and 70s, some of them funded by industry trying to disprove the fact that EMFs are harmless, and then they actually find out the opposite, and then they kind of don't say anything or cover it up. And then they also fund studies that muddy the water. So the AirPods, yes, AirPods, Bluetooth is very low power, which is why it's so popular, because electronics are all about, executing a lot of things and functions and features at low power, because else your battery will die even sooner. And it's been heavily adopted, but it uses 2.4 gigahertz, same frequency as Wi-Fi, very similar frequency to your microwave oven. And the problem with AirPods that I have is that you're putting them in your ear canal. So you couldn't be closer to your brain, which is one of it. Your brain and your heart and your reproductive organs are the most electromagnetically sensitive organs. They're most mitochondrial dense tissue. The brain has the most energy demand, and it's going to be the most sensitive. So if you had to choose between, holding your phone next to your head for 10 minutes versus putting your phone on the table and taking that call with AirPods, I would choose the AirPods
The
because they're
AirPods.
lower power. But
Right.
you could also just have your phone on speaker or use wired air tube headphones as well, and that would be far better, because if you're holding it in your hand on speaker, your hand is getting the brunt of the field because that's the closest, whereas you're saving your brain, your heart, which are much more important organ systems for our body. So it's a dilemma of the lack of multidisciplinary knowledge in science, that physicists, engineers don't know anything about biology, and that biology, or I should say, medical practitioners, biochemical experts know nothing about physics and electromagnetism.
Interesting. I mean, it's basically the same what's going on in the food industry. That like the the guidelines and the public. I mean, the public guidelines. The science is sponsored or funded by the industries. It's basically the same going on here, right? I mean, Google, Meta, their interests, their economic interests is everything that we actually. It's being funded by the industry.
Yeah, it's more so the telecom industry, like the Verizon, OG was like Motorola, and some of these, like this happened really a lot of it in the 90s, and the US specifically. There was a major bill in 1996 that passed that allowed telecom companies to build infrastructure towers wherever they want. And 1996 is also the last year the FCC has updated its guidelines for safety thresholds on wireless technology. That's like before Wi-Fi was mainstream, and it was 2G, and we've had 3G, 4G, 5G, and there's been, of course, almost no studies on 5G. There's been studies done in the past on similar frequencies, not the exact same thing, and they're kind of even being more avoidant, right? So it's similar to
Right.
the generally recognized as safe in the food industry, where they're just like, oh yeah, we don't have enough time to study all these little molecules, these food additives, these colorings, which again, in Europe, it's far more stringent, but in the US, they're just like, all right, here's a pass. For EMFs, it's kind of like that, but even worse, to where there's just like, we're going to approve this and roll this out, and there's no science anymore, but there is all this science in similar 2G, 3G, and just other frequency bands that have been done for decades. However, that's not indicative of modern technology, and in general, this is considered to be safe. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
it's crazy. But if you think about the same lens where the food companies and the governing agencies, they don't have our best interest in mind. The pharmaceutical companies, like it's all centered around what I like to call as like the fiat monetary system. So they
Right?
need to keep growing and growing. And the business model that tech has set up is to keep us on device, on screen longer. And without that, it kind of collapses. So you look at, if you're skeptical about food and pharma and medicine, the tech industry is even bigger than all of those. So why should we
Yeah.
be so ignorant to think that they also have our best interest in mind? And I know that EMFs is really it's a real challenge for people to wrap their head around it because they can't see it. It's intangible. It's very, very inconvenient. And it's like, oh my God, there's another thing. You're telling me my phone is killing me now too. Um, but the fact is that I think people are catching on that technology is really designed to be addictive. And
Yeah.
that's where I like to start. That's where I like to meet people at. And I add the EMFs if they're ready for that conversation. But we should all be cognizant that the further we stray from the natural world, the worse off we're going to be biologically.
Yeah, right. I totally agree. I like the analogy fiat currencies and cryptocurrencies. I know that you are cryptocurrency. You're advocating for cryptocurrencies. So am I. I believe that that's um the fiat currencies for sure. That's something that's gonna sooner or later is gonna fall apart.
It always
So
comes back to
yeah,
money, right? That's
yeah,
you can always trace that back. For incentives drive outcomes, and when the incentives are
totally.
completely misaligned, then you get the societal situation that we have right now.
Yeah, yeah. So tell me about daylight computer.
Yeah. So I've been on this health journey for a while, and probably like yourself, you get excited when you can implement solutions. You can make deliberate changes that have profound impact. You can start eating cleaner. You can get rid of the plastic in your house, improve your clothing and your sleep environment, and have a total sense of agency over your lifestyle habit. And then you just build positive feedback loops from there, and you spend more time outside. You feel great. For me, I was in that completely dialed in, but then I was building a brand on social media, a podcast as well, and I was kind of spending more and more time on devices and technology, as we all are now, because we're all so hyper connected, and COVID has really proliferated that indoor time. Screen time has never been higher, especially for kids, which is the biggest concern for me. And there is no alternative. Like, you can wear blue light blockers, you can try to work outside. I mean, right now I have like a pillow covering my MacBook just so I can do this without my MacBook overheating. And you can just try, but they're really all band-aid solutions. And I got connected with Anjan, who is the my founder, CEO of Daylight, and really we discussed on my podcast over a year ago that he was just trying to build an actual solution for healthier devices, that he's been working on this for years, and that we need an alternative to the Apple, to the Google devices, the suite of products that is really driving this attention-based economy we have now into a concerning direction. And we need something. We need something that solves the fundamental issues of why tech is bad for us. And you can quickly list that out as things we've already talked about here. Is they're keeping us indoors because they're not designed to be used outdoors. They don't function well outdoors, and modern offices and work environment are all centered around indoor use because of that constraint. They have this artificial light spectrum. They're very dominant in blue light. They're completely absent of infrared, very minimal in red. So very unbalanced spectrum. The light is then flickering because they have LEDs. And that is a electronics engineering decision for color performance optimization. And the OS, the
Creating
software.
addiction,
Yes.
actually. that
Yes.
that that environment creates
Yes.
an
So
addiction.
you go down this list of it's been optimized for stimulation, it's been optimized for bright colors, for processing speeds. It's been designed now to really keep you on device longer. So it's straight away from the original intention of computers was to just be a tool for people to solve problems. Now it's a completely just artificial and alternative reality, and it's not conducive. It's really detracting from the human experience. I think it's the biggest toxin in our environment, and it has completely been unaddressed, and it's the largest companies in the world, and competing with them, unlike, food where you can buy from a local farmer or kind of take upon your own hands, unlike clothes or anything else, water is very kind of easy to solve in the greater scheme of things, whereas our phones, our computers, this is not something you can just like spin up quickly and have a better solution. So daylight computer is exactly that. And it's been years in the making. And the main interface with our technology is the screen itself, the display. So that's what we pioneered. We invented a new display technology that looks and feels like digital paper. It's monochrome, it's black and white. So there's no blue light, there's no stimulating colors. It's reflective at its core, so you can use it outside. You can see it really well in the direct sun. It when you write on it, it feels like kind of a digital piece of paper. It's similar vibe feel to like a Kindle or an e-reader or a Remarkable tablet, but all of those products are e-readers, so they've only been able to do enough or have a fast enough display to take notes and read. And we wanted to solve that. We wanted to be able to have that experience of low stimulation and digital paper, but then you can actually send emails on it. You could actually do almost everything you need to do for work in that environment outside or at nighttime. And we made a custom backlight that's blue light free and flicker free. So we're really trying to address these problems at the root cause and have a solution, which our first product is a tablet, and that you can just use without this high barrier to entry, without needing to customize settings and wear blue light blockers or buy a crazy work outside setup. It's just that's been intentionally designed at step one so that
Mm,
we can ultimately return to something that's real. Like the device is
correct.
there for you to just get work done, be on the internet when you need it, read, write, get stuff done, learn, access this unbelievable amount of information without being so distracted, without being so really overstimulated and kind of taken away from in terms of your life force and what you're able to accomplish, because that's the goal of the tech companies today. So it's really just returning to tech being a tool and
That's
being
such a great idea.
and being
Yeah.
able to use it in the real world, which is
Yeah.
outside and
Which
not.
is outside.
Yeah.
Also, I think, I mean, my children are between 1 year and 19 years old. And doesn't matter the age, they're immediately they get like absorbed by this reality, which is not reality. And then as soon as you take the iPhone or the iPad away from them, they get so disappointed because nothing actually beats what's there.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to compete because everything is so colorful, everything is so attractive. And then when you leave that digital artificial world, everything gets like gray and dull. And that's
That's right.
that's so tough. That's so
So we
tough to
want the
compete with that.
opposite. We want
Yeah.
the device to be gray and dull, and then your
Yeah.
real world to be full of color. That's what we
That's
need.
how it should be.
That's how it should be. That's what it's always been.
Yeah.
And it's
And again, it's very similar to the food industry and food, you know, everything that is like refined sugars, refined everything. It's you create a product that is actually more how should I say, it's more interesting than
yeah,
the real
yeah.
world, than the real food and whole foods.
That's where it's like it's intuitive eating, but if you put someone in the middle aisles of a grocery store and they start like eating some of these foods, like it's not fair. Like we're gonna lose. Like we are losing. It's
Exactly.
been
Yeah.
engineered to be so addicting, and it's the
Yeah.
same thing
Very
with
addicting.
technology. It's the red 40. It's the maltodextrin of computers. Like it's all of that. And
Yeah,
it
right.
has similar metabolic effects and effects on our brain. So when you do take it
The
away
dopamine, right?
from your kid, yeah, it's blue
Yeah.
light's the most dopaminergic. It's nature's
Mm.
stimulant. So the more, and then don't even get me started on the actual algorithm and the software and the form factor, even like of a phone. It's so easy to scroll on your phone. When's the last time you scrolled on your laptop? Never. And you can't even use Instagram on your laptop in the same way. Oh, I wonder
Right.
why. That's because they designed it that way. And
Yeah.
what we're trying to do and what we have this insane opportunity is we're not only reinventing the hardware, which is vastly important because if you think of like a casino, that's
Mm.
our modern devices. We have
Yeah.
the bright flashing lights. There's no sunlight. There's
It's
all
like
these
a casino.
colors. Where you
Totally.
take that away, then you take away the notifications. You kind of have this software environment to where you can just stay really focused on one thing you're doing. Like if you're reading and you have a question, instead of going to Google and getting all these notifications, you can just press a button and ask it and have it answered. That's where we're building out our own software called SoloS to be very synergistic with productivity so that when
Hmm.
you are working and you are on screen, on device, you're able to just lock in and work as opposed to just being constantly bombarded with everything and having 40 tabs and 40 messages. And then you're on social media all of a sudden and you forgot what you were doing. And that's a big key because we can actually innovate across the whole stack of hardware and software. And then again, if you're on Instagram or TikTok and you don't have color and you're outside, all of a sudden you're going to be a lot less likely to be scrolling on your phone or scrolling on, our tablet product because it's not as interesting. And we've seen that anecdotally. We've had customers tell us like, this is more interesting than my kid sitting inside doing nothing or picking his nose, but it's less interesting than him going outside and playing in the backyard. And that's what we want because we want to get back to playing outside or living,
It's
fulfilling
back to
things
real life.
in person. There's like, it's a social catastrophe that people
Mm.
don't have real life
It is.
relationships anymore. And we're seeing that the younger generation is suffering immensely, and we need to
Yeah.
get them back to reality.
Totally. So you launched this tablet. What is the next product? What are you working on?
Yeah, so we launched the DC-1, the daily computer, in May of last year. It's been gone really well. We're super happy and appreciative of everyone who supported us.
Great.
And it's a testament, I would say, that people are hungry for this. Like we launched on
Mm.
Twitter and sold out very quickly. We're
Amazing.
back on sale now, but to me, it's just like the timing is so perfect and people are waking up to this. So we're really excited to build out the software environment over this year. We're excited to make improvements to the tablet product line. We're considering a monitor. Everyone's asked us about doing a phone. I would say that we're not fully sure. We're exploring right now
Um,
because everyone always asks me about a phone and I'm like, why do you need your phone? Why are we accepting that this form factor of this 6-inch or whatever it is demonic device is something that we should go and make? Because I think we should be asking the question is what is really an outside the box solution to where we could just get rid of the phone? Is it a laptop, tablet, and a watch? Is it something completely out of left field? I don't know. We're of course going to explore it, but this is how we need to be thinking. How can we actually like reinvent technology to where we can be as productive as we need to be, but it's much more synergistic. And yeah, we're thinking about it.
mi-
I want to reinvent wireless technology. How do we change Wi-Fi completely to where it's safer and more targeted or less harmful? So I would encourage everyone to give us ideas, share with us what you would like to see features, because we're open to it all, and we're gonna iterate over the coming years, and that's what's really fun about this, because tech hasn't innovated anything, right? They're just like innovating on processors and color rendering. Nothing's really changing over there, and
Right.
it's time it
Yeah.
has.
So, Tristan, what we've talked about today, is there anything that you would like to share that we didn't dig into? Something that you think is really important?
I think what's really important in general for health is to be realistic about where we're at, where you are at in your individual health journey, that there is a lot of good information available online, but the most important information is how you feel on a daily basis. And yes, there are a lot of toxins in our environment. There's a lot, and we've talked about them. And I'm sure on this podcast, you've talked about others in depth, and it can be overwhelming. But, and sometimes, especially the electromagnetic ones, the light, turning off your Wi Fi, the tech, grounding, things like that, you can implement these things and you might not notice a difference. But for me, what I like to tell people is, when you cut something out that's toxic and add something back in that's beneficial, the difference will be subtle. However, when you then go to an environment where it's suboptimal and you're adding that back in, all of a sudden you will notice it.
Yeah.
And I think just trusting in the fact that whatever you can do to get yourself closer to more natural input signals, to being more consistent, to having more fulfilling relationships, that's really what moves the needle. However, if you stress yourself out and you're having 4,200 inputs and supplements and biomarkers that you're tracking, like, that's probably not going to be a net positive either. So I think we do the best we can in our situation. We think about how we can get back to reality, and we also should be very cognizant of what someone is doing or their lifestyle habits in one corner of the world is sometimes really helpful, but sometimes they're in a completely different environment. So we shouldn't always be trying to copy word from word. And intuitively, how your body feels is going to be the biggest indicator. Because what I've noticed on my personal health journey is, when you try to over optimize for things, you can almost overdo it. And the best part of what I like to see is people trying things, seeing how they feel, but not losing touch for what actually matters. And what actually matters is what you're doing in real life, like having a purpose, having a loving family and friends,
Yeah.
and having free time in the real world. So if you can dial those things in, that will move the needle far more than these little optimizations here and there. But experiment and see how you feel. And I think naturally, when you have that true like center and passion, you're going to gravitate towards these better lifestyle choices anyway over time. And the best part is, as I'm sure you've realized as well, there's a lot more alternatives. There's a lot more solutions. So I implore anyone to support these kind of up and coming solutions, and especially ideally hyper local, like sourcing things from your local farmer, buying
Yeah.
clothing, like connecting with your local community. I try and be as community and locally driven as possible, because that's my reality. That's my immediate world. And it's
Yeah.
easy to go
Yeah.
on the internet and just be inundated with what's going on somewhere else. And that's weird. That's unnatural for us to know what's even going on across the world in a moment's notice, but we don't even know our neighbors across the street. And that's a part of this whole mission to like return to reality, I think. And
Mm.
yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to do in Wyoming and with daylight. And I think it's really exciting. But I think the most important takeaway is for the children, for the next generation, because they are the most sensitive. They have developing biology, they have smaller body sizes, they're more prone to being addicted to, whether it's, food that is lighting up their brain, whether
Much more
it's
sensitive.
their iPads.
Yeah.
And if we don't intervene now, we are going to have a very, very bad situation in the future because they're going to grow up. We're already seeing with these mental health issues, infertility, and at a certain point, that's going to be the majority if we don't make a change now. So I would encourage parents to come together and like share ideas, share what's working, talk about educational paths and solutions that might work for you, because that one's the hardest one, and the hardest one to explore alone. So there's a lot of great folks out there, a lot of great information. And again, going back to kind of the community front of building something in a little group that can be very impactful to the next
Totally.
generation.
Yeah. And when you mention grounding, earthing, I realized that I had a couple of questions on that.
Oh, yeah.
But let's leave it for the next. I'd love to do a follow-up podcast interview with you, Tristan. It's been so interesting, and I'm sure that our listeners had learned so much from what you've been talking about. So thank you so much. Where can people find you?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. And you can find me personally on Instagram. My name is at Tristan_health. Daylight Computer is at Daylight Co. on socials, Instagram, Twitter, X. And you can go to our website, daylightcomputer.com. We're live for sale. We ship to Europe, ship to the US. So support us, and yeah, appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak here, and really excited about all the momentum we have.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Talk to you soon, Tristan.
This was just one episode. There's so much more to discover. Check out the full podcast series, subscribe for future episodes, and let me know your thoughts in the comments.